I'm writing this from a room at Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas. I don't know how much longer they'll let me use my phone. The doctors here think I'm having a psychotic episode. They gave me haloperidol an hour ago, and I can feel it pulling at the edges of my thoughts, trying to soften everything into compliance. But I'm not psychotic. I'm not delusional, and I need to get this down before the medication takes hold, or before what's growing inside me finishes what it started. My name's Cole. I'm 29. I moved to Las Vegas 8 months ago from Tulsa for a job that fell through, and I stayed because, well, leaving felt like admitting I'd failed. I live in a one-bedroom apartment at the Palms Royale, which is neither a palace nor royal. A stucco box off Boulder Highway, the kind of place where people land when they're between things. Nobody at the Palms Royale is where they intended to be. That's what made it easy for something like this to happen, and for nobody to notice until it was too late. 3 weeks ago, something entered my body. I know how it got in. I know when. I know exactly where on my skin it made contact. I've told 4 doctors, 2 nurses, a psychiatrist, and a crisis counselor. None of them believe me. They see a man with no insurance, no local family, and what they've charted as somatic delusion with self-injurious behavior. And they've decided that the things coming out of my skin are something I'm doing to myself. They're not. I'd been on the dating apps since I moved to Vegas. Not seriously, more out of boredom, and the particular emptiness that comes from living alone in a city designed for people who are together. Her profile appeared on Thursday night. I'd just gotten home from a double shift at a distribution center off Warm Springs Road. I was swiping without even really looking. Her name was Dahlia. 3 photos, a close-up of her face, a full body shot in front of a desert landscape, and one of her hand holding a flower. A dahlia, presumably. The bio said almost nothing. New to the area, looking for connection. She was beautiful in a way that felt deliberate, not filtered or contoured. Something more structural. High cheekbones, dark eyes that had an almost luminous quality. Smooth, and even catching the light like it was slightly wet. We matched instantly. She messaged first. In my experience, women who look like that don't message first. But I was tired and lonely and flattered, so I didn't really think about it. She was at my door in less than half an hour. Dahlia was tall, 5'10", maybe 5'11", and thin in a way that was striking rather than fragile. Her skin, in the porch light, had that same quality from the photos. A sheen, a smoothness that didn't look quite like regular skin. Like she'd been lightly oiled. Like her skin had one more layer than it should. Her hands were warm. That's the detail I keep coming back to. When she touched my arm at the door, her hand was warm. But not body temperature warm. Warmer than that. Like she'd been holding something hot. She came inside. We talked. We drank. I won't narrate what happened after that. What matters is that she stayed the night. And at some point, 3 or 4 in the morning, I woke up, and she was sitting upright in bed beside me. Not laying down, not sleeping. Sitting, perfectly straight, perfectly still, facing the wall. Her right hand was on my stomach, palm flat, fingers spread, pressing. Not hard, just firm, sustained. Her hand was hot, not warm, hot, like a compress. And there was a sensation beneath her palm that I couldn't identify. Not pain, not pressure, but a kind of movement, a feeling of something being transferred, like her hand was a doorway, and something was passing through it, into me. I fell back asleep. When I woke up, she was gone. No note. Her profile deleted. She'd unmatched and vanished completely. But there was a mark on my stomach. centered just below my navel, red, about the size of a silver dollar, slightly raised, slightly warm. I put antibiotic ointment on it and went to work, and didn't think about it again for 2 days. But the mark didn't heal. By day 3, it had spread to the size of my palm. The center had darkened slightly purple, with a raised ridge running through it like a vein. It didn't hurt. It itched. A deep itch. The kind that lives beneath the skin where you can't reach it. The kind of itch that makes you want to dig. The discoloration was spreading in tendrils, thin purple-red lines extending outward from the central mark like cracks in glass. They followed lines that had their own logic, not along veins or muscle groups, but along pathways I couldn't predict, as if something beneath the skin was navigating terrain I couldn't see. By day 5, I could see the threads. They were thin, thinner than hair, almost transparent, with a slight iridescence like spider silk in sunlight. They emerged from the center of the mark, pushing through the skin the way a splinter works its way out. Except, these weren't working their way out. They were growing. I could watch them extend a millimeter, pause, extend again, slow and deliberate, like something feeling its way into a new environment. By day 7, there were dozens. I went to the urgent care clinic on Boulder Highway, waited 2 hours. The PA looked at the mark for maybe 10 seconds and said it was probably fungal. Prescribed me clotrimazole cream. I showed her the threads, pulled one taut with tweezers so she could see. She said she didn't see anything. The thread was between my tweezers, catching the light, clearly there. She said it was probably a clothing fiber. I applied the cream for a week. The mark got worse. By day 10, the threads had reached my ribcage. They moved under the skin, thin lines of pressure radiating outward, like roots from a seed. The visible ones continued to grow, some 2 or 3 inches long, and they developed a quality I can only describe as deliberate. They didn't just hang there like hair. They moved toward warmth, toward contact. When I brought my hand close, they leaned toward my palm like plants, leaning toward light. I went to a different urgent care, then the ER at Sunrise, then a dermatologist. Each time I showed them everything. The mark, the threads, the subcutaneous lines I could trace with my finger. Each time they found nothing. Not, we see something but don't know what it is. Nothing. The dermatologist did a skin scraping and found no fungal elements, no parasites. She told me the redness was likely psychosomatic. I pulled one of the threads right there in her office, 6 inches long, slightly iridescent, glistening. I held it up. She looked at it the way you look at someone who's just confirmed your suspicion that they're unwell. She said it was a fiber. She said there's a name for what I had. Delusional parasitosis. She wrote it down on a prescription pad like a diagnosis, like a name for what I was, instead of what was inside me. The word delusional does something to you when it's applied by someone in a white coat. It doesn't just describe your condition. It restructures your credibility. You're not reporting symptoms anymore. You're exhibiting them. Your observations become evidence of your illness. Your instance becomes a symptom. The more you fight the label, the more it firmly attaches. I showed my coworker Ty the mark on day 12. He was the closest thing I had to a friend in Vegas. I pulled up my shirt in the break room and said, "Look." The mark had spread to cover most of my lower abdomen, dark lines branching outward like a river delta, with clusters of visible threads emerging at the nodes. It looked wrong. It looked like something that shouldn't be happening to a human body. Ty's face did something complicated. Not horror, discomfort. The kind that comes from being asked to witness something you'd rather not be involved in. He said it looked like a rash. He said he couldn't really see anything when I showed him the threads. And I saw the shift, the recategorizing of me. He was looking at me the way the dermatologist had. Within a week, he told our supervisor I seemed off. I was called in for a wellness check. That was really a warning. By day 17, I was separated from the job. The supervisor said I was welcome to reapply after I'd gotten things sorted out. The organism had taken my job the same way it would take everything. Not directly, but by making me into someone the world couldn't accommodate. The threads were invisible to everyone else, but their effects weren't. The scratching, the desperation, the slow erosion of the person I'd been. The organism's camouflage wasn't invisibility. It was plausible deniability. It hid behind a diagnosis that everyone was already prepared to believe. Day 18, the threads reached my chest. The visible threads had multiplied into hundreds, covering my lower torso in a pattern that looked almost beautiful in certain lights, like filigree, like embroidery, and the ones that had been growing longest had developed structures on their tips, tiny bulbs, smaller than a pinhead, that looked almost like seed pods, or eggs, something designed to carry and distribute. That was the day I started pulling them. Tweezers at first, then needle-nosed pliers when they'd gotten thicker and more deeply anchored. Each one came with a bead of blood and a sensation of tearing that went deeper than skin. And because they were connected, every thread to every other thread, and beneath them, the network continued. And they grew back. Every time. More of them. Longer. As if the pulling had stimulated growth. As if the organism interpreted my resistance as encouragement. By day 20, the threads reached my neck. I lined my apartment with the curtains drawn and understood that I was being consumed. Not the way a disease consumes, attacking and destroying. This was integration. The organism wasn't killing my tissue. It was replacing it, thread by thread, filament by filament, substituting itself for me. When I lie still, the growth was smoother, almost gentle. When I moved or fought, the filaments tightened, not pushing, correcting. The way a vine tightens around a trellis when the wind tries to shake it loose. At night, I lie in bed in the dark and listen to my own body. Not my heartbeat, not my breathing. The other sounds, a faint, rhythmic rustling, like silk being drawn through a needle. The sound of threads growing, extending through tissue, branching at junctions, weaving themselves into the architecture of what I used to be. And the organism had preferences, warmth, darkness, stillness. The more it grew, the more its preferences felt like mine. Day 21, I pulled a thread from my forearm that was 2 feet long and didn't break. I wound it around my finger, and it pulsed. I could feel my own heartbeat in it, transmitted through the filament, like a signal through a wire. It wasn't a single strand anymore. It was braided, 3 or 4 filaments twisted together into something structural. The ER doctor saw what every doctor before him had seen. Self-harm, excoriation, a man destroying his own skin and blaming something invisible. The psychiatrist asked her assessment questions. I told her everything. Dahlia, the mark, the threads. She nodded through all of it, calm, patient. Then she recommended a voluntary psychiatric hold. I asked her to look. I lifted my shirt. By then, the threads covered my torso from hip to collarbone, shimmering in the fluorescent light, moving in a slow, synchronized undulation, like seagrass in a current. She looked at my chest the way you look at a wall. I pulled a thread, held it between my fingers, extended it toward her. and it reached for her hand the way the threads always reached for warmth. She looked at my empty fingers and understood that whatever these threads were, they existed in a space that no one else could access. I agreed to the hold, not because I believed them, because the threads had reached my jaw, and I was afraid of what would happen when they reached my brain. The psych ward at Sunrise is its own kind of horror, not because of the other patients. My roommate Gerald talks to someone named Captain Frank, who isn't there, and the woman across the hall hums the same 4 notes on a loop. The horror is the system. When I told the nurse my skin felt different, she documented, "Patient continues to express somatic delusions." When I asked for a mirror so I could check the progression, the request was denied, because mirrors can be triggering for patients with body-focused fixations. When I tried to explain what was happening calmly and rationally, the psychiatrist noted, "Patient demonstrates elaborate delusional framework with high internal consistency, suggestive of encapsulated psychotic episode." High internal consistency. She meant my story made too much sense for a crazy person. The diagnosis was unfalsifiable. There was no version of Cole who could describe what was happening to his body and be believed. The medication doesn't affect the threads. The haloperidol softens my thoughts, makes it harder to maintain the distinction between what I want and what the organism wants. The doctors think they're treating psychosis, sedating the only part of me that's still fighting. Yesterday, Gerald shook my hand. A normal interaction, maybe 2 seconds of contact. But I felt the threads in my palm surge toward the surface, toward his skin. When I pulled away, a single thread stretched between us, swaying, then broke. Gerald didn't notice. But this morning, Gerald was scratching his palm. I searched for Dahlia everywhere. Nothing. She doesn't exist in any digital space. But I've been thinking about her profile photo. The one of her hand holding the flower. Her wrist, just visible at the edge of the frame. There were threads, fine as silk, catching the desert light. She wasn't carrying the organism. She was the organism. What I'd taken for luminous skin was the threads. Millions of them. Woven so tightly, they'd replaced whatever she'd been before. She was the finished product. The thing I'm becoming. This morning, a doctor came who wasn't part of the psych team. Older. He came alone, without a nurse, without a chart. He closed the door, pulled up a chair, and said 4 words. "Show me the threads." I lifted my shirt. He didn't flinch. He looked at the threads the way a mechanic looks at an engine, with recognition. He took out surgical forceps, gripped a thread at the base, and pulled, gently, with the practiced control of someone who'd done this many times before. He told me he'd been tracking cases like mine for 11 years. They appear in clusters, always in transient populations. Vegas, Phoenix, Houston. Always initiated through contact with individuals matching Dahlia's description. Always invisible to standard examination. Always diagnosed as delusional parasitosis. Always progressing to full integration within 4 to 6 weeks. He said the organism isn't terrestrial. He said that calmly, the way you'd say the weather was changing. Not anything that existing biology can categorize. A colonizing agent that builds itself from available organic material. And then, when the host is fully integrated, it seeks a new host through contact. A reproductive cycle measured in bodies. I started crying. Not when the threads appeared. Not when the doctors called me delusional. Not when I lost my job. But when this stranger said, "Show me the threads." When he confirmed that what was happening was real. Something in my chest unlocked. The relief lasted about 30 seconds. Then he rolled up his sleeve. His forearm was covered in threads. dense, mature, woven into his skin so tightly, they looked like they'd always been there. That sheen, that smoothness. He was one of them. He said he'd completed his transformation 6 years ago. The process was irreversible after a certain point, a point I had already passed. The organism didn't destroy consciousness, he said. It restructured it. He was still himself, still a doctor, but also something else, something additional. He described it as a partnership, but his eyes didn't match the word. He said I could fight it or let it finish. Either way, it was going to finish. Then he put his hand on my shoulder. His hand was warm, warmer than it should have been. And the threads in my shoulder surged toward his palm, the way every living thing surges toward what it recognizes. He left 20 minutes ago. The nurse didn't log his visit. I don't think they saw him. I'm writing this because the doctor was wrong about one thing. He said I had a choice between terror and understanding. But there's a third option. Testimony. The threads are in my hands now. I can feel them in my fingers as I type. And they've been in my chest and stomach for weeks. They reached my neck 2 days ago, my jaw yesterday. And this morning, I felt them behind my eyes. A faint pressure. A sense of something settling in, making itself comfortable in the spaces where I keep my thoughts. My skin is changing. The texture is smoother. The sheen is developing. When I hold my hands up to a fluorescent light, I can see the threads just beneath the surface. A dense network that looks less like an infection and more like architecture. Something is being built out of me, and the building is almost done. If you're reading this, if you're on an app in a city where nobody knows your name and someone matches with you who seems too beautiful, too available, too willing, pay attention to their skin. Look for the sheen. Look for the smoothness. And if they touch you, and the touch is too warm, and in the morning they're gone, and there's a mark where their hand was, go to a doctor. Show them. And when they tell you nothing is there, don't believe them. Believe your body. Believe the itch. Believe the threads. The haloperidol's hitting hard now. My thoughts are going soft at the edges. The threads are settling in behind my eyes, and the sensation isn't pain. It's warmth. A hum, low and constant, like the sound of something being woven. Gerald is scratching his palm again. And I don't think I'm going to tell him why.